A single food so powerful it could sustain a person for weeks on nothing but a fistful per day. So valuable that controlling its supply nearly sparked a full-scale war. So perfectly engineered that Arctic explorers 100 years later would stake their lives on it in the most hostile environment on Earth.
This food could last decades without refrigeration, deliver more energy than any ration known to man, and required nothing but dried meat and animal fat to make. In 1814, a colonial governor tried to control who could trade it. The result? 22 dead in 15 minutes, a continent-wide conflict, and the birth of a nation. The food was pemmican. The villain wasn't greed or hunger. It was the machinery of empire trying to own what belonged to the land and the people who knew it best. This is where abundance meets control, and where a survival food became the spark of rebellion. Pemmican doesn't look like much, a dark, dense block. Rough to the touch, faintly sweet if berries were added, otherwise rich with the scent of rendered fat. But in your hand, you're holding something revolutionary. 5 pounds of bison meat, dried under the prairie sun until brittle. Pounded into powder with stones and wooden mallets, mixed with an equal weight of rendered tallow, melted and poured over the meat until every fiber is saturated. Sometimes Saskatoon berries or cranberries, dried and crushed, folded into the mixture. The Cree called it Pemmican, manufactured grease, a technology perfected over centuries. The numbers tell the story. 1 pound of finished pemmican contains the nutrition of 5 pounds of fresh meat. A 90-pound bag, called a taureau, held the concentrated energy of an entire bison. Packed into rawhide pouches, sealed with more tallow, it became virtually indestructible. Room temperature? 1 to 5 years, no question. Cool storage? A decade, easily. There are documented cases of pemmican stored in cellars being consumed after 50 years. Some military rations, vacuum-sealed and forgotten, were found edible after a century. This wasn't just food. It was portable survival. A handful could sustain an adult through a day of hard travel. 2 pounds per day kept voyageurs paddling 18-hour shifts through the Canadian wilderness. No cooking required. No water needed. Bite off a chunk, chew, and your body gets protein, fat, and sustained energy release that lasts for hours. The Métis, descendants of French fur traders and indigenous women, mastered pemmican production on an industrial scale. During summer hunts, entire communities would process hundreds of bison. The women did the precision work, cutting meat into thin strips, monitoring the drying process, rendering fat to exact consistency, pounding and mixing with mathematical precision. This was chemistry without laboratories, engineering without blueprints, a perfect food designed for a mobile life. The Hudson's Bay Company and Northwest Company, the twin giants of the fur trade, ran on pemmican. Every brigade heading into the interior carried bags of it. Every trading post stocked it. Without pemmican, the entire continental trade network would collapse. Voyageurs couldn't carry enough fresh food. Hunting took time they didn't have. Game wasn't always available. But pemmican was certainty. The Métis weren't just making food. They were manufacturing the fuel that powered an empire. And empires don't like depending on people they can't control. The Red River area, where the Red and Assiniboine rivers meet in what's now Manitoba, was Métis territory by the early 1800s. Not claimed, lived. Families had strips of land along the river, gardens and small farms near the water, buffalo hunting grounds spreading west across the plains. The Métis weren't settlers in the colonial sense. They were a new people, born from two worlds, fluent in both. French, English, Cree, Ojibwe. They spoke all of them. They moved between indigenous kinship networks and European trade systems with practiced ease. They hunted bison using techniques perfected over generations, on horseback, in coordinated groups that could take down dozens of animals in a single run. And they controlled the pemmican supply. Every spring and fall, Métis hunters would ride out, hundreds of people, traveling as a mobile community. The hunt was discipline and tradition. Rules about when to start, how to share the kill, how to process the meat. After the hunt came the work. Women cut and dried meat, rendered fat, mixed and packed the finished product. By the end of summer, thousands of bags of pemmican sat ready for transport. The Northwest Company, headquartered in Montreal, needed this food desperately. Their canoe brigades traveled thousands of miles into Athabasca and beyond. The Métis supplied them. It was trade, but also alliance. The Nor'westers, as they were called, respected Métis autonomy. They paid fair prices. They didn't try to dictate terms. Then came the Hudson's Bay Company's new plan. Thomas Douglas, the 5th Earl of Selkirk, had bought enough shares in the company to control huge tracts of land. In 1811, he established the Red River Colony. Scottish and Irish settlers brought across the ocean with promises of farmland. The problem? The land wasn't empty. The Métis were already there. Selkirk's governor, Miles Macdonell, arrived in 1812. By 1814, the colony was struggling. Food shortages, harsh winters, settlers unprepared for the climate. Macdonell looked at the Métis, saw bags of pemmican being sold to the Northwest Company, and made a decision that would change everything. On January 8, 1814, he issued the Pemmican Proclamation. The decree banned the export of pemmican from the Red River District for 1 year. All provisions were to be kept for the colony. Penalties for violation were severe. The Métis response was immediate. Who was this governor to tell them where they could sell food they made from animals they hunted on land they lived on? Cuthbert Grant, a young Métis leader and clerk with the Northwest Company, publicly disregarded the proclamation. The pemmican trade continued. This wasn't just about food. It was about sovereignty, about who had the right to control resources on indigenous land. The Métis saw themselves as a new nation, free people. The proclamation was a direct attack on their way of life. Tensions simmered through 1815. There were confrontations, stolen horses, shots fired between Métis and settlers. The Northwest Company, seeing their supply line threatened, backed the Métis. The Hudson's Bay Company dug in, seizing pemmican shipments, destroying rival trading posts. In March 1816, HBC men captured and demolished Fort Gibraltar, the Northwest Company's post at the Forks. Retaliation was inevitable. June 19, 1816. Cuthbert Grant led a party of about 60 Métis and allied indigenous freighters toward Lake Winnipeg. They had reclaimed bags of pemmican seized by HBC earlier. The plan was simple. Deliver the supplies to Northwest Company brigades. Avoid the colony. Keep moving. They rode in 2 groups, one on each side of the Red River, trying to pass west of the settlement. Around 5 in the afternoon, HBC lookouts spotted the second group. Robert Semple, the new governor who'd replaced Macdonell, made a choice. He gathered 26 to 28 men, mostly HBC employees and a few settlers, armed them, and marched out on foot to confront the mounted Métis at a place called 7 Oaks. The Métis called it La Grenouillère, the frog plane. Neither side wanted a massacre. Both expected a confrontation. Semple and his men approached. The Métis, on horseback, outnumbering the HBC group nearly 3-1, formed a line. François Firmin Boucher rode forward to parley with Semple. Words were exchanged. Angry words. Semple tried to seize Boucher's horse. Someone fired a shot. Historical investigations later concluded it was likely one of Semple's men. Then everything exploded. The Métis were expert marksmen. Most of Semple's party were not soldiers. The fight lasted 15 minutes. When the gunfire stopped, Governor Semple lay dead. 20 of his men were killed. On the Métis side, one casualty, 16-year-old Joseph Letendre. The disparity wasn't murder. It was the result of experienced plains fighters on horseback facing inexperienced men on foot in open ground. But the aftermath was brutal. The remaining HBC men surrendered. The Métis took Fort Douglas the next day. Most of the settlers fled the colony within a week, fearing another attack. Lord Selkirk, hearing the news months later, led a force of 90 discharged soldiers to Fort William, the Northwest Company's headquarters, and seized it. The conflict, later called the Pemmican War, dragged both companies to the edge of bankruptcy. In 1821, they merged under the Hudson's Bay Company name. But something else had happened. The Métis had fought for their rights and won. The Métis flag, a blue field with a white infinity symbol, flew at Seven Oaks. A song was written, La Chanson de la Grenouillère, celebrating the victory. They had asserted themselves as La Nouvelle Nation, the new nation. And it started over pemmican. Right now, as industrial agriculture strains under climate change and global supply chains face disruption after disruption, one of humanity's oldest survival foods sits quietly in the background, waiting. Pemmican represents something dangerous to systems built on dependence. It's food you can make yourself. That lasts longer than any corporation's product. That requires no middleman, no distributor, no government approval. Just knowledge, effort, and resources anyone with access to meat and fat can obtain. The Pemmican Proclamation failed because you can't control people who can feed themselves. The Métis proved that. And every time someone today learns to make pemmican, renders their own fat, and stores away pounds of self-sufficient nutrition, they're continuing that legacy. The question is whether we're willing to remember what our ancestors knew. That food sovereignty isn't a trend, it's survival. That the best technologies aren't always the newest. Sometimes they're the ones we forgot. If control over a simple survival food could nearly start a war, what does that tell you about who benefits when you can't feed yourself? And what happens when you learn you can?